that all the gas stations in Novorossiysk have run out of gasoline. This has already been reported by several media outlets.
There is no more gasoline in Moscow. At this moment, that's for sure. Because I've been driving on the MCAD for an hour already. I've passed more than 15 gas stations, and you know what? That's right. Not a single one has gasoline. At least not 95 octane. I'm even ready to wait in line for an hour and pay twice as much for it, but I paid 2,700 for 27 liters. Where else have you ever seen anything like that?
The Russian army conducted military exercises in case of a Ukrainian landing in Crimea, while the peninsula was plunged into complete darkness. As a result of Ukrainian drone strikes on the night of July 3rd, 7 electrical substations and a solar power plant caught fire at once, causing power outages throughout Crimea. That same night, the occupiers lost 7 aircraft at once. Drones from the Security Service of Ukraine struck fighter jets at the Saki airfield for the second time in a week and hit hangars at the Novorossiysk airfield in occupied Crimea. And there's one more bridge down in Crimea. And you remember that regular Crimeans and newly arrived Russians can no longer buy gasoline at gas stations on the peninsula. So today in Novorossiysk, Russian Federation, gas stations have suspended gasoline sales to the general public and only owners of fuel cards can fill up their cars. This means that in Novorossiysk, just like in Crimea, an ordinary Russian can no longer buy gasoline at all. At the same time, lines at gas stations in Russia are already being recorded from space as they stretch for a record 4 kilometers. And this happened just yesterday in Chita, and that's more than 5,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Russians are being told that all of this is fake, but I'll show you that this is real. At the same time, in 12 regions of Russia, public transportation has officially been shut down, while Putin is receiving handouts from Kazakhstan in the form of fuel tankers. And here is the Lukoil refinery in the Nizhny Novgorod region, which we were literally talking about just yesterday, and it has completely stopped its operations. Against this backdrop, after a massive Russian attack on Kyiv, Donald Trump refused to send his negotiators Witkoff and Kushner to Moscow, calling it a pointless waste of time just for a photo opportunity. As a result, it became clear that even people around Donald Trump were betting on Ukraine being able to force Vladimir Putin to the negotiating table by force. My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss this topic together, but before we start this episode, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, like the episode, and leave any comment under this video. So, in this video, a multi-kilometer line at one of the gas stations in the Zabaikalsky Krai of the Russian Federation was captured from the air. And now OSINT analysts have already determined that this video was filmed in the Chita area, near a Rosneft gas station in the urban settlement of Atamonovsko in the Chita district. And according to conservative estimates, the line is about 4 kilometers long and there are roughly 800 cars in it. The Rosneft gas station shown in this video receives its fuel from the oil refinery in Khabarovsk. And here's the paradox. The thing is, Ukraine did not strike this particular facility. And let me remind you, Chita is located more than 5,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. And that's why all this shows that the fuel crisis has become systemic across all of Russia, and it's simply impossible to hide it anymore. And it's funny that Russians try to pretend that this isn't really happening, that it's all the work of Ukrainian PSYOPs agents. Well, for example, yesterday a Russian Z propagandist posted that the video with the huge line is all fake. Like, listen, Ukraine used artificial intelligence to make this video, so you shouldn't pay any attention to it at all. And now I'll quote this Z propagandist. So he writes, they threw in some bullshit and some irresponsible hype seekers spread it further. In reality, this video was created by artificial intelligence. The enemy continues to skillfully take advantage of the situation and is trying to make the most of Russia's fuel problems. In fact, it's a very competent and subtle job in the information space. The most effective information psychological operation subtly weaves lies into reality, making it nearly impossible to tell them apart from the truth. We need to be as careful as possible when consuming information in these challenging times. Right now, it's easy to deceive yourself and even unintentionally deceive others. Well, I have to agree with this propagandist from the Telegram channel Veterans notes that you really do need to be careful with information coming from unwashed Russians. Right, but that's not the point. The thing is, this line that Russian propagandists call fake can actually be seen from a satellite. Moreover, the authorities, let me emphasize, the official authorities of the Zabaikalsky Krai of the Russian Federation have stated that they are taking urgent measures to stabilize the situation with the fuel shortage and the lines at gas stations. The governor of this region, Alexander Osipov, said that the authorities want to introduce electronic queues, strengthen control over order at gas stations with the help of the police and organize equipment, to provide hot meals and deliver drinking water. What do you think? Are there problems with the queues, or is it all artificial intelligence? And now, attention to everyone who was sure that this was really some kind of fake video. I'm quoting the governor of the region, Alexander Osipov. People are standing in lines for days, some with children. I talked to the drivers. There is a need to adjust how gas stations operate and change a lot to make things more convenient for people. And finally, here's a video that shows the same line, but this time filmed from a passing car. So not from the air, but right from the ground. Sound. And overall, the problems with fuel supply started back at the end of June. On June 25 in the Zabaikalsky Krai, the sale of gasoline to individuals was limited to 15 liters per day. On June 28, a similar restriction was introduced in the Irkutsk region. At Rosneft gas stations, a limit of 50 liters per vehicle was set, and the sale of fuel in canisters was also prohibited. Amid the shortage, the largest private gas station network, BRK, uniting more than 100 gas stations in the Irkutsk region, Buryatia, and the Transbaikal territory since July, it has stopped selling gasoline to individuals. Once again, we're talking about regions that are thousands and thousands of kilometers away from the border with Ukraine. Well, apparently they also hoped that this bloody, barbaric war of the Russians against Ukraine would never affect them. And all of this is a direct result of the massive attacks by the armed forces of Ukraine on Russian oil refineries. Just yesterday we discussed with you the response to the Russians for the attack on Kyiv, in particular the strike on the Nizhny Novgorod Nefteorg Syntez oil refinery, which belongs to Lukoil. And today, the company announced that Lukoil's refinery has completely stopped processing oil. Ranking 4th in Russia in terms of capacity and 2nd in gasoline production, the refinery in Nizhny Novgorod region was attacked on Thursday. As a result, the main primary processing unit AVT6 at the plant was damaged, which provided 53% of the entire facility's capacity. Another unit, AVT5, which accounts for 25% of the plant's capacity, was put out of operation by a drone back on June 24. And after yesterday's fire, the plant completely shut down. Capable of processing 15 million tons of oil annually and producing 5 million tons of gasoline, the refinery in the Nizhny Novgorod region became the 5th Russian oil refinery to halt its production since the beginning of June. On June 16, the Moscow refinery of Gazpromneft stopped processing. Since June 12, the Taneko refinery in Nizhnekamsk has also halted its operations. On June 10, the Kuybyshev refinery stopped. On June 1, the Volgograd oil refinery stopped. Overall, since the beginning of March, Ukrainian drones have attacked Russian oil industry facilities at least 50 times. As a result, today Novorossiysk has taken over the baton from Crimea. Officially in Novorossiysk, free sale of gasoline at gas stations has been suspended and only fuel card holders can refuel their cars. This was announced by the city's municipal management center. Fuel cards are issued to legal entities under contracts with fuel operators, and as you know, they are intended for refueling company vehicles. Diesel fuel is still available in limited quantities at 8 gas stations throughout the entire city of Novorossiysk. This is also an official statement from the local municipality, and here's the irony. Novorossiysk is the largest oil port in Russia on the Black Sea. The port handles the transshipment of oil and petroleum products as well as the export of raw materials from Kazakhstan. Liquid cargoes, including oil and petroleum products, account for about 100 million tons per year. The city also has an oil depot and terminals of the largest Russian oil companies, which supply the entire south of Russia. But now, in this city, ordinary Russians can't get gasoline. And since we mentioned Kazakhstan, it's worth noting that Russia will still get gasoline from Astana. The Kazakhs will send 50,000 tons of fuel to the Russians as humanitarian aid. You know, I've never seen such humiliation before. Russia, a gas station country that boasts about its greatness, is now begging around the world and asking for humanitarian aid in the form of gasoline. Can you imagine? I mean, literally just 6 months ago, let me remind you, Russian propagandists like Solovyov were shouting at the top of their lungs that if Kazakhstan did something wrong, they would declare a special military operation against Kazakhstan. Like Kazakhstan will repeat the fate of Ukraine and so on and so on and so on. But in the end, now Russians are on their knees begging Kazakhstan, please give us gasoline. And Kazakhstan says, fine, as humanitarian aid, we'll give you beggars a little gasoline. But here, of course, I'll explain why Kazakhs decided to call it humanitarian aid. Obviously, I'm being ironic. The thing is, Astana had previously imposed a ban on fuel exports, but it seems that Tokayev couldn't refuse Putin, so they came up with this so-called humanitarian aid. Like, it's not commercial export, it's just aid to the wild Russian people. Well, at the same time, it became known that Russia has already agreed to buy the first batches of gasoline and jet fuel from India and Japan. How do you like that, the greatness of Russia? And these stories about the greatness of Russians could go on forever, but I'll just highlight them with one quote. The Speaker of the State Duma of the Russian Federation, Vyacheslav Volodin, against the backdrop of the fuel crisis, urged Russians to simply get their asses onto trams. Quote, "It is necessary to prioritize the development of urban electric transport, namely trams. A single 3-section tram can carry up to 260 passengers and can replace 200 cars, and after modernization, the average speed of trams can double. I see that the future belongs to high-speed trams." Occupied Crimea has been left not only without gasoline but also without electricity and aviation. In several districts of Crimea, whose defense against a potential landing by the Ukrainian armed forces was recently practiced by Russian troops during exercises, 7 electrical substations and a solar power plant caught fire as a result of Ukrainian drone strikes on the night of July 3. This was reported by the monitoring channel Crimea Veta, which tracks thermal signatures in satellite images to record the aftermath of attacks. Last night, substations in Belogorsk were on fire, which is about 40 kilometers from the capital of Crimea, Simferopol. Power stations were also on fire in Marianovka, Stary Krim, the city of Saki, and Jankoy. And as a result, the local so-called authorities reported rolling blackouts across all of Crimea. And you know, it's funny that against this backdrop, Russian military expert and reserve colonel Viktor Murakovsky stated that he took part in a command and staff military exercise called Crimean Wake Up, in which a scenario was played out involving a possible landing of the armed forces of Ukraine in Crimea and actions to defend against it. In short, Russians are really afraid of this scenario. At the same time, on the night of July 3rd, Ukrainian units struck the railway bridge over the Krasnogvardeyski Canal. Russian troops used this facility for military logistics, specifically for transporting equipment, weapons, and personnel. But the main strike was directed at Saki. Drones from the Security Service of Ukraine struck fighter jets at the Saki airfield for the second time this week and targeted hangars at the Gvardiiske airfield in occupied Crimea. According to the Security Service of Ukraine, 7 hangars storing aircraft equipment, which contained fighter jets, were hit at the Saki airfield, and frontline bombers Su-30, Sem-Su-30 and Su-24. According to preliminary information, at least 7 Russian aircraft have been destroyed or damaged. And this is already the second strike by the SBU on the Saki airfield in a week as part of the very 40-day operation to influence the Russian Federation, which was previously announced by Volodymyr Zelensky. At the Khvadiysk military airfield, 2 hangars were hit, where Shahed drones and aviation equipment were stored. The Saki and Khvadiysk military airfields are among the key aviation bases of the Russian occupation forces in Crimea. And it is from there that tactical aviation aircraft regularly take off, carrying out missile and bomb strikes on the territory of Ukraine and supporting Russian forces' operations in the south. Meanwhile, after the barbaric attack by the savage Russians on Kiev on the night of July 2, the White House decided not to send its envoys to Moscow for a meeting with Vladimir Putin. As the New York Times writes today, in Moscow, they are eagerly awaiting Trump's representatives, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, hoping to secure favorable terms for ending the war with Ukraine. Vladimir Putin especially values his relationship with Witkoff, considering their meeting as the most important channel for achieving his goals, which can only be realized with the help of the United States of America. But Trump's envoys are in no hurry to go to Moscow, well, just as they aren't rushing to Kiev either. Next, I'll quote the New York Times. Trump's representatives would be willing to go if new issues for discussion arose, but they will not do it just for a photo opportunity. Stephen Witkoff and Jared Kushner are in contact with representatives of Russia and Ukraine almost daily and have held personal meetings with them that were not reported in the press. But in Iran they have things to do, while in Moscow, which rejects all calls and demands from Kiev to start peace talks or limit military actions, there is nothing to do. And here I should remind you that Vladimir Putin, in his Sunday interview, once again claimed that supposedly at a meeting with Donald Trump in Anchorage in August 2025, quote, compromises were discussed that were addressed to us by the American side. And according to him, again quoting, we thought about it, not right away, but we thought about it and said, yes, we agree. In response to a similar statement by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that Trump did not make any agreements with Putin in Alaska. Quote, there was only a proposal, but no agreement was reached. Putin, however, has since refused to meet with Volodymyr Zelensky, who called on him to personally resolve the conflict. And having refused the Ukrainian president's proposal to at least stop long-range strikes, he stated in an interview, referring to representatives of Trump, the following quote, we are expecting, after the completion of all events of the active phase on the Iranian track, we are expecting the arrival of Trump's representatives, but let's put it this way, the active phase, as Putin put it, of the Iranian track has long since passed. Witkoff and Kushner, after Putin's words, went this week not to Moscow but to Qatar for negotiations with representatives of Iran. The US and Tehran agreed to prepare a full settlement agreement within 60 days after signing the Memorandum of Understanding, that is, by August 18. However, Donald Trump told his aides that he doesn't see a problem if the negotiations drag on. This will give the participants more time to discuss the nuclear program of the Islamic Republic of Iran, so Witkoff and Kushner may be dealing with the Iranian issue for more than 1 month. And here the New York Times writes that Putin's team became very tense about this, because they were hoping to return to this negotiation track after all, against the backdrop of Ukrainian strikes on Russian territory. And Witkoff and Kushner are not in a hurry to go to Moscow anytime soon, but the Russians are desperately trying to at least have some kind of conversation with Donald Trump's administration. The fact is that today, July 3rd, a Russian government Il-96 aircraft arrived at Washington Dulles International Airport. Who exactly is on board is unknown, but there is speculation that the Kremlin sent its diplomats to beg Donald Trump for meetings and negotiations. Since the White House made it clear that it will no longer chase after the balding dictator Putin and try to persuade him to talk. Why? Because Ukraine is now destroying his oil industry and it's in his interest to somehow seek dialogue. And at the end of the episode, I'll share some news that I hope will make you smile, so you finish the episode with a smile. Deputy Chairman of the State Duma Committee of the Russian Federation on Information Policy, United Russia member Oleg Mitvechev stated that voting against the United Russia Party in the upcoming elections would mean supporting the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. Next, I will quote him. Recently, Zelensky made it clear that he dreams of United Russia's defeat in the autumn elections and will do everything possible to achieve this. Now, the Russian voter essentially faces a simple choice. Whose side are they on, with Putin or with Zelensky, huh? If you're with Putin, you vote for United Russia. If you're with Zelensky, you vote against it. There is no other option for you. End of quote from this Matveyev. How do you like that? So if you don't vote for the party of that bald bastard Putin, it means you're automatically a traitor to Russia. If you vote for someone else, or more precisely, if you don't vote for Putin's party, it means you're 100% for Zelensky. But what's funny is that the statement was made against the backdrop of United Russia's ratings dropping. According to data from VTSIOM, the faction's rating had been declining since the beginning of the year and by the end of April was at 27.7%. However, after the polling methodology died in June, it rose a bit to 32%. Well, if we follow the logic of this United Russia member, it turns out that in Russia, Zelensky's support, is even higher than in Ukraine. And they kept saying, illegitimate, illegitimate. Well, I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.